Welcome to this edition of Security and Compliance Weekly. On our show today, we're joined by Dr. Zulfikar Ramzan, who is the Chief Digital Officer for today's sponsor, RSA. We're going to be talking about how the new, maybe permanent for some, virtual workplace that so many are resorting to helps to prevent this, to help prevent the spread of coronavirus is causing many organizations to rethink their approach to measuring digital risk and how to respond to malicious actors who are taking advantage of this new digital landscape. We call this segment Never Trust and Verify. In our second segment, we're going to take an SCW-style look at the cyber credit score industry. That means we're having a compliance topic discussion here on the Discord channel. We'll figure out what it is we're talking about, what it purports to do, who it's trying to help, who benefits from it or not. Should be an interesting discussion. Looking forward to the contributions of our loyal Discord followers, discordants, and it should be interesting. So join us as we continue to tear down silos and build bridges on Security and Compliance Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production. And now, it's the show that bridges the requirements of regulations, compliance, and privacy with those of security. Your trusted source for complying with various mandates, building effective programs, and current compliance news. It's time for Security and Compliance Weekly. Cyber risk and compliance automation is finally here. Legacy GRC systems cannot simplify the complex use cases and deliver powerful automation that cyber teams need. CyberSaint's integrated risk management solution ingests data from your existing tech stack, dynamically lighting up controls using patented AI. Leverage your expertise and showcase business value. Let your risk and compliance solution work for you. See why the most forward-thinking CISOs of the Fortune 500 support their teams with CyberSaint. Maximize your cybersecurity program today. Visit securityweekly.com/CyberSaintSCW. The average cost to respond to an insider threat is $11.45 million. That's a lot of reasons why a functional insider threat program must be a core part of any modern cybersecurity strategy. To protect your organization's sensitive data and meet compliance requirements, you need controls in place to deter, detect, and disrupt insider threats. With ECRAN system, you can meet control requirements imposed by compliance mandates all within one insider threat management platform. Get your free 30-day trial at securityweekly.com/ECRAN. That's EKRAN, and fulfill your compliance requirements. The question is simple. Have any of the systems on my network been compromised? The answer is harder than it should be. Enter AI Hunter. Active Countermeasures has automated and streamlined techniques used by the best pen testers and threat hunters in the industry to create AI Hunter, a network threat hunting solution that does the first pass of a hunt for you to identify systems that are most likely to be compromised and scores the results on a scale from 0 to 100. You can then research those systems in depth with AI Hunter. Focus your valuable time on the systems that need your expertise with AI Hunter. Sign up for a personal demo today at securityweekly.com/ACM.
Welcome to episode 53 of Security and Compliance Weekly, recorded on November 24th, 2020. It's just 2 days before what we call in the United States Thanksgiving. I'm your host, Mr. Jeff Mann. Joining me today are my co-hosts, Mr. Scott Lyons and Mr. Josh Marbed. Gentlemen, welcome.
Pleasure.
Hope you're doing well. Looking forward to a few days off and hopefully finding something to give thanks for. Like we have the coolest Discord server in the universe, in my opinion.
Dude, I'm catching up. I'm trying to catch up. There's like 300 new messages.
It started.
In the last,
few hours. Almost 3 hours ago. Yeah,
dude, I blame Jim Gilson, okay? I blame Jim Gilson for it all.
No, dude, Jim is running a freaking ICS compliance class in the Discord right now.
Yes.
Seriously.
Hey,
he's amazing.
Seriously. I need to give an announcement. In our upcoming webcasts and technical trainings, you will learn how to build a risk-based vulnerability management program, how to prevent phishing scams, and how to move beyond vulnerability scanning to vulnerability fixing. Visit securityweekly.com/webcast to see what we have coming up, or visit securityweekly.com/on-demand to see what we have coming down. That is previously recorded webcast. All right. So today we're joined by Dr. Zulfikar Ramzan, and I promised to make fun of him for being a PhD by calling him doctor. We are joined by one of the most educated people we'll meet. So Zuli, welcome to Security and Compliance Weekly.
Hey, thank you. It's good to be here.
Well, we are looking forward to our discussion today because I certainly enjoyed the discussion we had on our prep call last week. Let's start off by tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, how you got into cybersecurity, and in particularly, how did you end up and what is this role you have at RSA, the Chief Digital Officer?
Yeah, so, my background is I've been in cybersecurity now for about 20 plus years. I can't even count anymore, but really kind of got my start in cryptography, started doing my kind of PhD and master's work in that area. I graduated, spent some time in the industry, worked at a series of companies, Symantec, among others, left Symantec to do a startup. That startup was called Immunet. Eventually, through a series of acquisitions, I ended up at Cisco through SourceFire, and then left Cisco to do another startup called Elastica in the CASB space. That ended up through a series of acquisitions kind of to Blue Coat and then Blue Coat to Symantec. And it was almost like a deja vu all over again scenario. I kind of left during that process and joined RSA, where I've been for the last 5 years. Interestingly enough, my PhD work was done under the supervision of Ron Rivest, who's the R in RSA. So for me, RSA has been essentially like coming home. It's really been the academic family business, if you will. And for me, in the last 5 years, I've played a variety of roles, really mostly as a CTO for the company, focusing a lot on our internal R&D and driving innovations in key areas. In the last few months, I've taken on a broader title of Chief Digital Officer, thinking about digital transformation across all of RSA, not just in our own product lines, but how do we protect RSA? How do we manage our new IT stack? As you noted earlier, RSA just spun out and is now a separate independent company. We used to be part of Dell before. We're now independent. And we've got this amazing mandate to essentially build an IT stack from scratch and a security stack from scratch. And it's really exciting, and I'm excited about the opportunity.
Well, what I hear you saying, Zuli, is that RSA is looking to someday be acquired by Symantec.
I hopefully not. As much as I like Symantec, but I think this is a company that's got just an incredible brand presence in the industry. If you think about it, RSA is the longest existing pure play cybersecurity brand on the planet. What's interesting, by the way, with RSA and Symantec is they were both founded in 1982. The same year, but Symantec, when it was first founded, I think we talked about this last time, was not focused on security. They were looking at things like compilers and utilities tools and so on and so forth. Whereas RSA always started off in the security space and has grown tremendously since then. And if anything, I think that's really an opportunity for us to leverage what we've done over the past 40 years. And the world today could not imagine a world where we depend more on digital technologies and need digital trust. And if we can help enable that, that would be a powerful thing to do.
Sounds good. And I was just teasing about it, but if RSA ever does get acquired by Symantec, everybody knows who to blame because of your legacy.
You heard it here first, right?
That's right. Hey, so before we jump into our topic, we do have one question to ask you, which is what we call the hot seat question. And this question is just to help our viewers and listening audience to just kind of get a little bit of sense of where you're coming from, since our show is focused on security and compliance and sort of the conflict that exists between those schools of thought, if you will. We like to ask all of our guests this question, which is simply, where do you fall on what we like to call the security versus compliance continuum? No right or wrong answers, just what's your impressions? How do you see the world through a security or a compliance lens?
Yes, I'd say, my roots are kind of in the core security part of it, where, it's really about understanding, how to meet and achieve a set of needs. But I think over time, what I've realized is that, compliance is a massive driver for security purchasing, security decisions, and we have to account for that. I think the other thing I've learned, especially in the last few years, and you've seen it with security and compliance in general, is that security is not just about, a group of people in a corner somewhere trying to decide what to do about IT infrastructure or protecting an organization. Security today is something that's come on the front lines. It's something that's of interest to the CEO, to the board. And in that vein, business needs have to be aligned with security needs. And I think that our biggest challenge right now as an industry, the security industry in particular, is to bridge that gap between security needs and business speak. And that gap, if we can bridge it correctly, I think we can chart a really wonderful path forward. Compliance plays an incredible role in driving that agenda.
Interesting. Oh, we did have one question come in from our Discord server. And by the way, there's a lot of conversation that goes on our Discord server, and it's very common for questions to be asked there that we'll try to pass on to you. First question is simply, where'd you get your PhD?
So MIT, so I got a chance to work with Ron Rivest, there, did my master's there as well. What's kind of interesting is even though my PhD was in cryptography, I got into cryptography, interestingly enough, through things like machine learning and AI. And that's might surprise some people because now those two areas, security and AI and machine learning, are certainly coming together in some deep ways. But I was always fascinated by the idea of, I started off with, what can you do in terms of how can machines learn? And to me, that problem comes down to one question: is I've got this black box. I get to see what goes in and what goes out. Can I understand how the black box works? That's what machine learning looks at. Cryptography says, can you design a black box so that even if somebody sees what goes in and what goes out, the mechanism of the black box is still safeguarded somehow? And so they actually ask almost like a dual question, which I think leads to this really remarkable set of mathematical relationships. And I've always been fascinated by those relationships.
Wow. So I don't know about Scott or Josh, but I'm feeling very inadequate right now. I too have a cryptographic.
Well, Jeff, let me help you here.
PhD in crypto.
Yeah.
From MIT.
Yeah.
And not cryptocurrency, by the way, is I always like to point out, because nowadays that term has gotten abused a little bit. But
so it's not a PhD in blockchain. Come on, man.
All I can throw up is that I'm certified by the National Security Agency as a crypto analyst, and one of my professors was Whitfield Diffie. So that's all I got. I can see your Rivest and raise you a Diffie. How's that?
That's right. Well, I have to get the long, mane of hair but no, Whit's amazing. I mean, obviously, and they inspired each other, right? So it was interesting enough that it was Whit, Diffie, and Marty Hellman wrote a paper in 1976, the original Diffie-Hellman paper, and Ron Rivest read that paper, and at the back of that paper was a series of open questions around whether one could construct a cryptographic system that had a split key, where it was a public half and a private half. And Rivest, together with Adi Shimmer and Lane Edelman, were inspired by that paper, and that open problem they eventually were able to solve, and that's what led to the RSA crypto system and really the birth of the security industry in the private sector.
Yeah, but they didn't know that quantum computing was on the horizon, no matter how far off that horizon was. So back to the drawing board, people.
Yeah. Well, it'll be a while back. Hopefully, keeping my fingers crossed. I know never say never, but we'll see. It's pretty challenging to build a quantum computer at scale, and I think
anyway, we digress, but I had to.
No, we really don't. We really don't digress, because now when you start talking about zero trust, zero trust to what level? Yeah. Do we have to build it to the level that I need to be wary of a quantum computer when it happens? Right. Like personally, okay, so I'll bring it back to cryptocurrency just because you mentioned it. But my personal canary, if you will, for quantum computing being real is when Satoshi's coins move. Okay. Yeah. And some of them actually did move the other day, but I think that's a different story. But if some of Satoshi's coins move, well, the private key hasn't changed. So it's sort of a static canary, if that makes sense. So, so what level of zero trusts sort of are there? I mean, you mentioned zero trust, but it's not a monolithic idea. There's multiple levels, aren't there?
Yeah, I think you're spot on. And to me, I think that even the terminology zero trust is a bit problematic, right? Because the whole idea behind zero trust was that in security, trust is a negative concept. If I have to trust a system, that typically means I'm assuming it's going to behave in a certain way, but without any corresponding level of assurance that it will actually behave in that way. So zero trust involves taking a leap of faith in how a system is going to
behave.
If
he starts talking Turing complete, smack him. No, just kidding. Go ahead.
We'll get to Turing complete in a little bit. But you're right. Like at some level, and you go back to the 70s, when Rebecca Schirmer and Edelman published the RSA paper, they even talked about this idea back then of a trusted entity called a certificate authority, somebody who could effectively handle digital certificates and sort of be an intermediary. And it was understood in that paper that notion was a negative notion. You don't want to have to trust something. The issue, I think you pointed out, rightfully so, is that can we ever get to the point where we reduce the trust surface to zero? And that's the goal of zero trust. We never really get there. It's a journey. We try to minimize that trust surface, and that's the
well said.
Wait, so you're saying zero trust won't solve all problems?
Oh, I'm going to hit you.
I would say zero trust and blockchain are in that same category, as well as machine learning, and they're all pretty cool sounding concepts. None of them solve every problem whatsoever.
Well, it was funny. I was reading through LinkedIn.
Come on.
I was reading through LinkedIn earlier, and somebody was putting up a premise that blockchain is like the perfect mitigation tactic for DOS or DDoS.
Wait, say that again, Scott. I missed that.
I said I was reading through LinkedIn earlier, and I was looking at different articles, and somebody had made the posture, or taken the posture that blockchain is the perfect mitigation strategy for DOS, DDoS attacks.
All right, I've not heard that one before, but here's my take on blockchain, which is that, and I'll say something maybe somewhat bold. Let's say outside of cryptocurrencies and kind of transaction type applications, the really original applications in which blockchain was invented, there are no applications outside of those that in its current incarnation could be solved with a blockchain that could not be more readily solved or more easily solved with legacy technologies that have been around for many years. And so if you look at it, usually some combination of a database plus a digital signature and maybe some timestamping could be used to solve most problems that people are trying to solve with blockchain. And so the question I ask is not, can you solve a problem with the blockchain? The real question is, should you be solving that problem with blockchain? And if not, are there better ways to solve that problem? Start off with what you're trying to solve, then think about what the technology looks like that's used to solve it.
Do you have a scenario where you answer that second question with the yes?
Where blockchain is actually better off than anything else?
Should you be solving it with blockchain?
No, I'm not
moving right along.
Yeah.
Well, that is the bottom line, I guess, on blockchain. So I still feel like we're commandeering this conversation a little bit. So let me just put it to you directly. What would you like to tell us today? What would you like to share with us in terms of zero trust and some of the things that RSA is looking into?
Yeah, no, look, I think this, we kind of meandered, but in a way, I think there's a profounder point with those meandering, which is that ultimately, we see new buzzwords enter the lexicon of IT and IT security all the time, right? And there's a certain sense that when these buzzwords enter in, it's incumbent upon us, the people in this field, to kind of discuss them so we understand what they mean and their implications for the broader community to be able to adopt and think through. And so zero trust, is sort of the latest kind of hot buzzword. Came out in 2010 with the paper written by John Kindervag of Forrester Research. Even though the underlying ideas have been around since the 70s, if you think about trust surface and reducing that, it's been around for a long time with things like least privilege and so on. But really, in the last 10 years, this concept is kind of was given birth and it's taken off, especially in the last few years. And I think it's going to be even more important as people think about what it's like to work in remote environments where all of a sudden, you don't have that same level of the network perimeter, so to speak, where you can kind of operate within some kind of confines. So to me, I think the main takeaways on zero trust, number one, it's not a product or a framework or a strategy. To me, it's a mindset. It's a way to think about security. And number two, I don't think we ever get to zero. I think ultimately there are degrees to which you can kind of reduce the trust surface, but never really get to zero. It's a journey, not a destination. And then third, I think the last and most important point is that to get there are many paths towards reducing your trust surface. To me, it's really about the path that helps you optimize your reduction in risk per dollar spent. And if you can really focus on that approach, that's going to be the most sensible approach for your organization to implement and embrace the zero trust concept or mindset.
So how, when you're dealing with things, sorry, let me take a step back. We're security and compliance. So let's bring the compliance aspect back into this. How, when you're dealing with things like, PCI, how does zero trust affect that standing?
Yeah, so I think to me, PCI, if you think about it for a moment, we focus on PCI because there's business value in being able to achieve a certain degree of compliance with PCI. Now, as part of that, there are many steps you can take towards how you achieve that. So, for example, thinking about data confidentiality, how data is moving, who has access to what, and ultimately, to be successful, you have to be able to find ways to reduce that trust surface. So, if I can minimize what I've got to trust, like let's say I have an entity trying to access a system, how do I know that entity should be allowed access to that system in the first place? Have I done the right level of governance and lifecycle around identities? Have I put the right level of multi-factor authentication in place to protect that transaction? Is the data encrypted at rest and in motion, for example, and potentially even to some degree in use? And those are the kinds of questions you've got to look at. And in each case, there's a certain set of assumptions about what you're willing to trust and where you have to actually take a leap of faith in terms of what has to work correctly. So to me, it's really never been about zero trust in the first place. It's really been about lean trust, if you will. How do I minimize that risk in an intelligent way?
So let me pause real quick because you said the magic word PCI. Scott set me up, and when compliance comes up in terms of anything we're talking about, my mind starts working in terms of, okay, what requirements are we meeting? And I'm having a hard time doing that with this concept of zero trust because we have not yet, at least for the purposes of this discussion, given a good working definition of what it means. Like, is it a concept? Is it a strategy? Or is it a specific set of tasks that sort of fall under, this umbrella naming convention? So if you would, please, a short working definition of what is meant or intended by the term zero trust.
Right. So I think it's a right question to ask. I suspect if you ask 10 different people, you'll get 10 variations on this answer. So I'll give you my perspective on it, which is number one, I think it's a mindset. It is not a strategy. It's not a product. It's not a framework. It's a mindset. It's a way of thinking about security and trust in general.
Okay.
Start there. The goal is ultimately, we have a trust surface in an organization. A trust surface, these are things we trust, but typically don't have any reason to trust. We have to kind of force to trust certain items. Like, here's a system. I know nothing about it. I'm going to trust that it's going to behave in the right way. And what you want to be able to do is minimize that trust surface, minimize what needs to be trusted, with the ideal state being to get to zero. But we never really will get to zero in practice because there's so many layers of complexity in the real world that we only get to a situation where we can minimize that trust surface in a meaningful way. And so for me, zero trust is that mindset around how do I minimize that trust surface? But I think it leaves open a number of other questions, like how do we get there and what's the right approach to take and what are the sensible ways to approach zero trust? And there are other ways to get to zero trust that are really meaningless or nonsensical for your environment. And I think all of the above tend to hold.
So, it's funny you say that because you opened with, sorry, Jeff, if you ask 10 people, you get 10 different definitions. We have found the exact same for the definition of pen testing, right?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, as we get to use these, among other things.
Oh, no, that was among many.
Unfortunately, as we get to use these buzzwords, listen to me, buzzwords.
What did you smoke?
Yeah, I know, right? As we get to use these buzzwords in multi-tenancy issues, right? True meaning becomes really muddled. Just walk with me. The true meaning becomes really muddled among a lot of people. And at the end of the day, we lose sight of what its real inception is, right?
No. You used at least two words wrongly in that speech. Dear God, you're going to kill me. Look, the big
That's
problem
kind of fun,
is that
Josh.
We all think we know what these words mean, and none of us talk to each other about them. And things like the FAIR Institute discuss what risk is, and surprise, surprise, nobody understands risk. And people like RSA say zero trust, and surprise, surprise, everybody's got a different definition. And we looked at Red Lion looked for the word pen test, and surprise, surprise, we asked 35 or 40 people and got different definitions from most of them. All of them were professionals and experts in the pen testing field. It's a terrifying world when we can't even determine the definition of a word that we use every day in presentations to executives, technologists, staff, and everything else. So we absolutely have to get proper definitions on these words, and I think you're going after that. So please keep going.
Yeah. By the way, I love. No, sorry. Go on.
No. Well, I was just going to say I agree with what Josh is saying, and one of the goals of this show is to come up with definitions. And to me, it's not so much an issue of we're going to define the term and everybody's got to go with our definition. I think it's more important in the context of whatever conversation or group setting you're in to at least, if not agree on a definition, at least understand where people are coming from in terms of their definitions. So, for example, you said zero trust is more of a state of mind. It's a mindset. It's a way of thinking. That helps me to put context around the conversation around zero trust. It also makes me wonder if we shouldn't think of pen testing as a state of mind or a way of thinking. But let's push that to a side. We're going to talk about pen testing on a later episode. I want to follow up on this. The concept of zero trust, then, in terms of compliance, it sounds to me like, and I think you alluded to this earlier. When it comes to compliance is providing maybe a nudge, if you will, to get companies thinking a certain way and getting into a mindset of you just don't conduct business the way you've been conducting business. You're using technology now. You're connecting to the internet. You're in the cloud. You're doing all this, that, and the other virtually and remotely. You need to think through some things, and maybe compliance is one way of getting companies to, in theory, systematically think through some things that they should be thinking about so that they can make informed decisions. Am I on the right track, or set me straight, doctor?
No, I think you are on the right track. To me, ultimately, so something like, let's say, compliance is a great example, because compliance will give you a set of things to think about. We never say compliance is holistic. It's not the only set of things to think about. But if you're not thinking about these things, you're probably missing something fairly basic. And so the goal there is at least to make sure that people are achieving at least a certain level, that they're thinking about the right kinds of issues and approaching the problem in a much more structured and intelligent way. So I'm going to go back to like a point that Johnny raised. You talked about the idea of risk, and we saw something very similar. So I had the opportunity to serve on the board of the FAIR Institute for a while. And the big thing that came up there was that we use the term risk all the time, and yet nobody really knows what it means. And when you can sit in a conversation and you'll hear the word risk used 5 times, and each time it's used differently. And in no instance is it actually aligned to what risk really should entail. But if you look at any other field, if I got on an airplane and I found out, hey, that the engineers who designed that plane didn't have a common definition of mass or velocity or acceleration or gravity, I am never going to board that plane. I mean, I would have stayed 100 feet away from it at any time. And yet in our industry, we use terms that are very foundational, but we don't really have a common set of definitions. And without that, it's very difficult to build the right foundation for all of us to be able to live in a world where we feel that we can, we can use digital technologies where they have a certain level of trustworthiness associated with them.
That's exactly what I was trying to say. Right there. That's exactly it. What he said.
Yeah.
The doc said it correctly. I didn't get it across. It just.
Well, that's why we have doctors on the show
baffling.
Occasionally.
Yeah.
We're talking in the Discord, by the way, right now about how we may not come up with definitions either on this show or in our lifetime or whatever, but if we can make people understand the assumptions that they're ingesting along with these definitions, that they assume everybody has the same one, even if all we can do is show them here are the assumptions you're taking for granted, it's valid and worthwhile for what we're doing. So
I know you're so spot. I mean, I think we and this happens all the time in our industry. So something new and exciting comes along. The folks who are new think of it's a panacea. They all of a sudden, will kind of double down, but without any clear North Star of what they're trying to aim for. And like when I think about zero trust, for me, one of the things that comes up all the time is that, no one technology gets you to zero. So no infinite set of technologies gets you to zero trust. No one technology will get you there at all. You have to be much more holistic if you want to reduce that trust surface. You've got to think about identity. You've got to think about governance and lifecycle of your digital identities as part of that. You've got to think about visibility into your environment. How do I know what's happening so that I can still validate remember, Zero Trust is like, it says never trust, always verify is this sort of key mantra. And so to always verify, you need visibility. And I'm amazed how many times I see a vendor, provide one small sliver that helps you towards Zero Trust, and then they put Zero Trust like in 38-point font on top of their marketing materials. Really, you've got to take a step back and say, what am I really attacking here? What problem am I solving? And if you're not solving that problem effectively, then you have to kind of go.
And there you go with that business stuff again. Use cases and actual problem solving. What's wrong with you, man? Just buy a silver bullet and, it's done. All your problems are solved. 1 or 2 or 50,000 point products and you're good. Isn't that right? I mean, come on.
Yeah, I think 7 or 8. I mean, that's my hope, and you get a red button and you press the easy button, you're done.
Exactly. Just push the big red button. What's the problem? Who needs a doctorate? Come on. No, I agree with you 100%.
No, but you are saying something that's really important, which is that ultimately in our industry, one of the biggest challenges we have is that oftentimes the questions we're asked sound very simple, but they're deceptively simple. They can be very complex to answer. Like, for example, if you're presenting to a board and something happened in your organization, they may ask, well, how did the threat actors get in, and what do they do when they got in, and how long have they been around, and what do they take? These are very simple questions to ask, but being able to answer them effectively, let's say in a breach context, is very difficult. Who had access to what system? Those are the kinds of things that surprisingly can be hard to answer if you don't think about those questions in advance. And I think that's where we get into troubles. We don't realize that these questions are difficult to answer, and we've got to do a lot of legwork up front to make sure we can answer them, because other people may not realize how complex they are to answer.
Yeah. So these are. Yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Yeah, gotcha.
Well, our time is our time is screwed up because we started late, so we are winding down on this episode. Zuli, as we had mentioned on the prep call, you're welcome to stay for the second segment where we're going to have a discussion on cyber credit scores, where I think we're going to put a lot of what we've just discussed into action in terms of understanding a terminology, a service offering. So, please, you're welcome to stay. I encourage you to stay. Before we wrap up, though, I want to give you the floor, Zuli, for any parting thoughts, parting message, call to action. What does RSA want us to know on this topic ultimately?
So first of all, I think the number one thing is that Zero Trust, even though the concept was introduced 10 years ago as nomenclature, the ideas have been around for decades. A lot of the vendors who've been in this space for many years already can help you get to that state where you reduce your trust surface, number one. Number two, no one product will get you there alone. You'll need a variety of capabilities. On the identity side, with MFA, you'll need governance and lifecycle. On the identity side, you'll need ways to look at your network stack and your endpoints, have that visibility across the board. Don't trust any one vendor alone or any one product alone to get you there. Look for that vendor who's got comprehensive capabilities. And ultimately, this is about a partnership model. When you talk about Zero Trust, it is not a one and done, it's a journey. So identify ways and people you can work with on that journey that'll be there with you every step of the way to help you evolve to the stage that you want to get to eventually. And no matter where you are on that journey, they can help you get to that next step. And that's really the main goal, I think, in security. If we can do that, if every day we can identify how we can do better the next day, then that would be, I think, a great state for us to be in the security industry. And I think we'll get towards that and help drive also our compliance needs as well.
Sounds great. Well, Zuli, thank you for joining us. This has certainly been an interesting and engaging and to some degree humbling discussion. We're going to take a quick break, come back and talk cyber credit scores. Don't go away.
Did you know that over 63% of cyber breaches are caused by a third-party vendor? CyberGRX is on a mission to modernize third-party cyber risk management. Built on the market's first third-party cyber risk exchange, CyberGRX arms you with fast and accurate data, a proven and innovative approach, so you can make rapid, informed decisions and confidently engage with partners. Learn how partnering with CyberGRX will help you become cyber certain. Visit securityweekly.com/CyberGRX. Are you struggling to reduce your cybersecurity risks and meet compliance mandates? Wishing you could be proactive instead of reactive? You need a solution that integrates cybersecurity together to make it affordable, accessible from anywhere, and simplistic, so you can gain a return on investment on your resources. Cyrisma is your answer. It gives you a single interface to identify sensitive data, vulnerable systems, insecure configurations, track progress, and assign accountability. Visit securityweekly.com/Cyrisma today for a 7-day test drive and impress your leadership. That's Cyrisma, CYRISMA. RSA offers business-driven security solutions that provide organizations with a unified approach to managing digital risk and designed to effectively detect and respond to advanced attacks, manage user access control, and reduce business risk, fraud, and cybercrime. For a limited time, get mobile multi-factor authentication from RSA Secure ID Access for free to help secure your remote or dynamic workforce long-term. Leverage push notification, biometric, and one-time password authenticators to secure access to your cloud applications, on-premises systems, legacy systems, privileged accounts, and more at no cost for 6 months. For more information, visit securityweekly.com/RSA Security.
Welcome back to Security and Compliance Weekly. Would you like to have all your favorite Security Weekly content at your fingertips? Do you want to hear from Sam and Andrea when we have upcoming webcasts and technical trainings? Do you have a question for one of our illustrious hosts? Someone from the Security Weekly team, or wish you could just hang out with the Security Weekly crew and community? You can do all this by subscribing on your favorite podcast catcher, signing up for our mailing list, and joining our Discord server to stay in the loop on all things Security Weekly. Start the whole journey at securityweekly.com/subscribe. Also, Security Weekly, in partnership with Cyber Risk Alliance, is excited to present Security Weekly Unlocked on December 10th, 2020. This one-day virtual event wraps up with the 15th anniversary edition of Paul's Security Weekly live on YouTube, and it should say live and virtually on YouTube, and we're all bummed that because of certain health situations we can't be together in studio, but we will get together someday. Sign up for this for free. Look at the agenda, securityweekly.com/unlocked. All right. We've had a great discussion so far. Zuli has agreed to stay with us. I think he's excited to be staying with us for the second part of the discussion. We're going to talk cyber credit scores. This came up a couple weeks ago. I forget whether it was on air or on the Discord server, but somebody had something to say about cyber credit scores, so we thought we'd take it up as a topic. I think to level set, in my little bit of research on cyber credit scores as a service, as an offering, as a something that vendors say that they do, it seems like, and any of you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like the focus is twofold, or the purpose for cyber credit scores. One is for organizations to get a sense of, are we doing things right? Are we doing things securely? How well are we doing? Which is anathema to PCI world, because in PCI it's pass fail. You don't get a score. You get a thumbs up or you get a thumbs down. But I know not everybody operates under PCI, even though they should. The other perspective, though, it seems that a lot of vendors that are doing this are going after is helping you to understand third-party relationships, supply chain relationships, service provider relationships. There's a very old adage, back from the beginnings of this thing that we call cyber today, that we used to call internet security, which is actually, it predates that, but you're only secure as your weakest link. And when your weakest link is third parties that you may or may not have control over or know what's going on within their network, you've sort of blown up your trust model. So number one, cyber credit scores it seems to give you a grade on how well you're doing, and two, it seems to be a way to vet companies that you are doing business with or wish to do business with from a third-party supply chain type of perspective. I guess that could probably extend a little bit into mergers and acquisitions, although I didn't see a whole lot of things being said about that. So gentlemen, open-ended question: Are we in the right ballpark in terms of where we want to go with this discussion? Don't all answer at once.
Oh boy. Okay, so cyber credit scores.
Yep.
There are many companies that try to do it. There are many companies that do it badly. There's many companies that claim that they are silver bullets for this. I don't know. I'm going to ask on the Discord, has anybody seen a company do it right? Okay. Most of the strategies that I've seen happen are basically they collect data flying by on the internet and then say, oh, so that company sent encrypted data, therefore they use encrypted data everywhere, therefore they're amazing, and they have a great score. And that's great, except you don't know anything about what they're doing inside. And for all you know, they sent encrypted data that you saw, but they sent unencrypted data that was over that way on a leg you don't have any access to. And they have, I don't know, an unused FTP server over on the side there that Heartland left open, or a direct insight into their accounting system from vendors that do their HVAC target. And so there could be problems there that you might not know about. So, when we talk about cyber credit scores, we're really talking about third-party risk management. Everybody okay with that? That I, bring that up type of thing? Or as the NIST CSF. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, yeah, that does seem to be the bulk of the quote unquote industry. The question that immediately jumps out to me when we're talking credit scoring is, and we use this as a somewhere early on in our show history as defining our terminology, and we came up with compliance as a measuring stick. My question is, when it comes to cyber credit scores, is what's the measuring stick being employed? And as we talked about in the first segment, if we can't even agree on definitions of the basic terminology that we throw around, can we reasonably expect to be in agreement on whatever the scoring criteria is? What is the basis for our scoring?
So, in doing research on some of this, right, I came across a pretty good explanation that you can break the cyber credit score into three areas, right? Low, mid, and high, right? And the explanation, which I think will help serve this discussion, goes like this. The basic service rates, businesses based on their industry and size. As an example, a SMB with a skeleton staff is not likely to have established cybersecurity procedures to put them in place, and may so earn a low score. A second service tier requires a security audit of a supplier in order to see whether or not they conform to specific security standards, such as the voluntary frameworks that are issued by NIST. And then the third level involves continuous monitoring of suppliers' critical systems and vulnerability scans. These kinds of services have a potential in a world where cyber threats have become a daily occurrence. So realistically, the security score is saying, how are we protecting data, right? And how are we protecting the business, along with what is going on with the supply chain? So when you're trying to develop a cyber credit score, right, it's a holistic approach that you're looking at. It's not just certain pieces like, PCI. So how
you did that deliberately.
Oh, I totally set that up. How do we take into account what a business is doing based on what they need to do to provide an accurate security posture, like we were just talking about Zero Trust? And then how does all of that go towards the ability to share data within the business, or use data as a widget to sell?
Wow! Now we're bringing Zero Trust.
I feel like you have to almost take a step back. Oh,
go ahead, Doctor. Please take it.
Oh, okay. No, I was going to say, I feel like, and I think it's something you alluded to earlier, which I think was really important, which is that, to what end are we doing all this work around cyber credit scores and so on? And typically, the two biggest use cases are managing third-party risks. Like I'm onboarding some vendors, I want to find out kind of where they stand. The second is maybe understanding my own posture relative to maybe some of those same considerations. And I think when you think of it that way, the real question to ask maybe is not, okay, is a cyber credit score like good on its own? Is it some kind of gold standard? Can I trust it? The more important question to ask is it going to help me mitigate this other issue, this third-party risk issue? And is it a reasonable tool to look at in that context? And I think those are two very different questions. I would think, look, it's maybe impossible to come up with a precise risk score, but I don't know if you need one to benefit from a cyber credit rating of some sort. And I'm going to kind of throw that out there as maybe a topic that I'd love to get your thoughts on.
Sorry, I'm discussing shawarma with fries on Discord. It's an amazing concept. Anyway,
well, the bigger question is a company like RSA, should a company like RSA be accountable to helping companies not only understand their credit score, but also evaluating credit score and then determining what those factors are? Could RSA throw its weight around? Right. That's really what I'm asking. Could RSA throw its weight around in this arena to help companies understand what is and what is not and where they are on the credit rating?
Wait, actually, I'm sorry. Can I bust in here for just a second here? The biggest problem with credit scores, cyber credit scores, whatever, is the same problem with zero trust, and that is visibility. And you mentioned that earlier, and I think it's a brilliant point. Without visibility, we cannot know what trust there is or what trust is available or what trust isn't available because it shouldn't be available. Without visibility, we can't understand the actual security of third-party, internal, whatever. It doesn't matter, some entity. So the problem is that to perform a proper zero trust or a proper security assessment, you must have visibility into the entity that you are referring to. Okay. Half of some portion of our industry is all about obfuscation. Even if it's not about real security, we obfuscate almost instinctively for OPSEC, PERSEC, XYZ sec, whatever. So it's fascinating to me that we're advocating for simultaneously more visibility and less trust. And so I don't know if I was on topic or not, but
sidebar rant on obfuscation. And this is sort of a cryptography thing. And Zuli, you're coming from the commercial world. I'd be interested in your perspective. But the way I was trained in the DoD when I was either working on the InfoSec side, designing secure crypto systems, or on the ops side, to some degree, it was mostly on the InfoSec side, but to some degree on the ops side, trying to break codes and crypto systems. But in particular in the InfoSec side, the premise of evaluating any system that was being designed to determine whether it was secure enough to produce and let our customers, the military, use it, was we assumed that the adversary knew everything that there was to know about the system at hand. Meaning, if it was and in my day, it was mostly machine systems. This was sort of predating software-based cryptography and computer and internet-based cryptography. But, the assumption was the adversary had gotten their hands on the device. They had reverse engineered it. They had the operating instructions. They had the manual. They knew everything that there was to know about the system. Is it still secure? And it's always bothered me that in the commercial world, in the private sector, so much goes into the premise of, is cryptography secure based on obfuscation? Well, we use a proprietary protocol. We're not going to share what we're doing and how we're doing it because that's our secret sauce. And every time I hear that, I'm like, bullshit. Tell me exactly what you're doing. Is it secure? But I realize I'm coming from a DoD slant. So Zuli, and I realize this is a little bit of a tangent, but I'm curious on your perspective, being MIT trained by Revest.
Stop.
What is the commercial worldview of obfuscation in terms of cryptography and cryptographic architectures, if you will.
Yeah, so it's funny you talk about the security by obscurity. So that idea came about. There was a famous paper by Kirchhoff's in the 1800s, written in French, called it basically translates to military cryptography. I've actually looked at the paper in French, but that's really where this idea of Kirchhoff's principle comes about, where what you want to do when you're designing cryptography is the key is the only thing you want to keep secret. The algorithm, the actual procedures, all that stuff should be kind of out in the open, known specifications. You can analyze it. You can figure out if the algorithm is good or not, but you want to kind of minimize what is kind of kept obfuscated, because the idea is that the bigger that thing is that you keep obfuscated, the harder it is to kind of maintain its secrecy. So with something like an algorithm, inevitably the algorithm gets used, it's executed, it's in code somewhere. Somebody can eventually figure out what the algorithm is. So it's not a good thing to keep obfuscated, whereas the key is the really thing you really want to focus on. So number one, I think we agree with that mindset 100%. And having said that, I think there are maybe some situations where we are kind of not in a kind of black or white world. We are kind of in an arms race against threat actors. For example, when it comes to something like machine learning and using it to be able to detect threats, there's a bit of an arms race there where if threat actors are trying to defeat your machine learning system, they will be able to do it, because most machine learning algorithms are not designed to work in the face of an active threat actor, some kind of sentient adversary who's deliberately trying to do things to compromise it. And so there are scenarios where you have to kind of keep some level of obfuscation, like exactly maybe how you tune your machine learning. But in those areas, you got to be very much willing to change constantly what's going on, so that you can keep a few steps ahead of the threat actors out there.
It's so interesting. And what is that?
I think you went to take a shawarma and chicken and the fries break.
Yeah, see, I start talking about shawarma with fries, and all of a sudden Zuli's on Discord going, "Really? Let me get in there." You know?
Yeah, shawarma just got spilled all over the board.
So, okay, we're all talking about similar things. We're talking about the visibility to the security gaze. I don't even know the right term. The visibility to outside or internal actors to determine the actual reality of security, compliance, business use cases, all of these different factors that matter. And I think it's fascinating that when you come down to it, we've taken security and compliance on this show, and Zuli with you here, and brought it to visibility, brought it to trust, brought it to and business, and things that are typically not even thought of in the security realm. And I think that's fascinating, and I'm really enjoying it, because at its core, these are very simple principles that we make very complex, all these products and all these things. But this is actually very simple in its own way. It's just how you use those terms.
I love that.
Well, do we need an actual like cyber credit score, or do we need to hold insurance carriers and insurance companies accountable for holding businesses accountable to doing compliance routines? You know, we've had a long-standing bane of existence on this show with cyber insurance companies, right?
So what you're saying, Scott, is should pen tests fall under cyber insurance? I think that's what you're warming up to.
No. That's a good try. That's a good try.
In terms of the credit score, I keep thinking, and this was going to be the other part of my thought before I went off on the tangent. If we're not even agreeing on definitions of terms, and if we're acknowledging that there's a lot of disparity in terms of just even our terminology, how are we agreeing on a score? So one company says, our rating system is 1 to 10. Or the next system is, our rating score is 0 to 100. You get a 50, you get an 80, you get a 90.
I have to say it. Mine goes to 11.
That's when and I want to invest in that company that offers 11 because
11.
in InfoSec prediction stance, right? Companies that don't do the right thing are going to need a cyber credit score to be able to show that, they are making progress, whereas cyber insurance is still going to falter in being able to provide that level of due diligence to show that a company is actually doing what they need to do.
Sorry, I can't get over the Karnak the magician hat. I'm trying to get.
It's his InfoSec
Karnak
prediction
the
hat, man. What's wrong with you?
magnificent.
It's the InfoSec prediction.
So make a prediction already.
Well, I did.
Oh, it's gone.
No comment.
It's
Seriously,
just
no
Scott
comment.
again.
All right. So in all seriousness,
in all seriousness, do we have anything good to say about credit scoring and credit scoring companies, or is it the next biggest scam?
It's a novel concept. It's a novel concept.
Zuli?
I think that the two places where you can. So one, I think that. So there's a score that comes out, and the next question is kind of what do you do with that score? Can you do something useful with it? And so the two places I see people looking at that score is, number one, can they look at the score over time? And maybe if the score goes down or up, that's something you may want to double click on. So even though the score itself may not have meaning on its own as one static data point, how it trends could be useful. So I'll throw that out there. And again, that depends on how you interpret it and what work you do after that point. The second thing, which I think could be useful with a credit scoring type approach, is that they typically try to compensate for what used to be done statically, right? So if I wanted to, let's say, assess the risk of a third-party vendor I'm working with, historically that was done, and even today it's still done with the questionnaire-based approach, where you provide questions, you get back answers. The answers are going to be kind of somewhat subjective based on the person answering it. Your mileage kind of varies, and it's very cumbersome and manual. Now we still need to do that for a lot of reasons. So don't get me wrong. I'm not suggesting we get rid of that approach, but if we can augment that with some kind of automation, where maybe we can look at some things automatically and use that to inform what kind of questions we ask and/or inform how we think about the risk of that third party, there's value there. And I'm not saying we're there yet. I think that it's an evolving concept. The way we do cyber risk scores is going to get better over time. But I do think even today there's some value in them, but it really is a question of how you use them as opposed to the actual mechanism itself.
Yeah, because you've got to have inter-rater reliability. You've got to have the ability to, everybody's got to be. It's got to be a valid score, a reliable score. It's got to be reproducible. It's got to have, interaction with the real-world usage of the scores. Multiple company scores, multiple vertical scores. This is not a small task, nor a small problem. And one of the problems is that the companies that are in this right now is many of the companies that are in this right now claim to be, the be all and end all. And I just don't think they are.
Well, let me ask a pointed question, and I don't know the answer to this, but, if we're talking about the cyber scores being useful in some aspect, and, aside from what does the score mean, I guess my question is, who's acting upon it? Like, are there cyber insurance companies out there today that are saying, in order to make a successful claim, you must be able to demonstrate that you've maintained a cyber credit score of X? I mean, is anybody other than just selling, well, you want to know what your credit scores are and you want to know what your third party's credit scores. Is there anybody that's actually using it from, I guess, what's the legal term? From a standpoint
of
actually,
for decisions.
Yeah, basis for decision. Thank you.
The answer is twofold. One is that companies are using it in their vendor management process and their vendor risk management process. So if you're, if they're using BitSight or what is the other one? Scorecard, something or other, cyber scorecard, and they're saying, oh, your score's too low, we can't use you as a vendor. You're losing business because of it. That's a problem. Okay. Or somebody who's maybe not be as competent as you is getting business because of it. The second thing is that they're using it not just for internal, like my company's vendors, but they're using it to rate things on RFPs. I guess that's still vendor. And governments, are starting to use various levels of maturity modeling for doing that type of thing. So it depends on how it's done. If it's done through a questionnaire, or if it's done through actual assessments, or it's done through actual, again, visibility into the products, the process, the technologies, the implementations, then it's proper. You're viewing what's actually being done. If you're doing it just on the basis of evidence whizzing by, I'm not entirely enthralled with that. I'm willing to be educated, but I'm not entirely enthralled. So, BitSider security, security scorecard, if you want to come on, I'm happy to discuss it with you.
Did you say it depends? That's very PCI of you.
I don't hear any dinging. There you go.
Dramatic pause.
Dramatic pause. I don't know why I'm brain farting on the legal term. If it's not criminal, it's
civil.
What's the other? Civil. Thank you. It sounds like none of us are aware of anybody that's using cyber credit scores from a civil perspective in terms of making claims or
cyber insurance. There was thank you for reminding me. There was a team that was being built for an insurance company. I won't name them. Very, very reputable insurance company. They were building a team to go in and basically, before they would sell you the insurance, they would have the team assess you, perform a full assessment on you, which is a brilliant idea. There's two problems with that. In this case, one, the team was so damn good that as they were building it, getting them to work together, giving them exercises, and trying to figure out how this would work into their workflow of selling insurance, right? They got an offer from a pen testing company, and wholesale went off to them. So they lost their entire team. The second problem is that if you add security assessment activities in whatever way you do it to the cost of the insurance, you're going to be 20 cents, a buck, $1,000, $100 million, whatever, more expensive than Joe Schmo down the lane who doesn't do anything except ask you, do you have a firewall, and then sell you the insurance. So there's the economic issues there as well. Of course, the difference would be in the exclusions. If you've been properly assessed, your exclusions are going to be much less than, and you'll have more chance of getting you're putting a valid claim in and getting paid for it than Joe Schmo's insurance company. But the problem is that Joe Schmo at the time of buying is cheaper, and your procurement is not exactly looking at your exclusions unless they're a really good procurement department. And
so I have two questions, and we'll try to get Zuli to weigh in on this. You get to answer first, Zuli, so pay attention. My first question is more of a philosophical question. We're talking in terms of credit scoring and risk ranking, however you want to define it, since we don't define our terms, as some sort of scale, some sort of range, some sort of sliding what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, depending on whatever. But it's certainly there's an implied, it's a number. Does it matter or not? Now, this contradicts, at least theoretically, the PCI world, where companies that have to follow PCI or put through the paces, either they do it themselves or they do it by a third party, they are evaluated to see if they are following all the PCI compliance requirements. And in the PCI world, not that it really pans out this way, but again, theoretically, you're doing everything 100% and you pass or you fail. There is no concept of you're 80% of the way there, you're 90% of the way there, and that's an acceptable range. So my philosophical question is, which philosophy is better? A sliding scale that's based on something that's somewhat arbitrary or unknown or undefined, or a more pie in the sky, no, you got to do it all and meet it at 100%, but nobody ever really does that, if we're being completely honest, but it's a laudable goal. Which unattainable scale is more pragmatic in today's world?
I don't know that either. I think it depends. Maybe that's a cop-out answer.
That's a very PCI response.
Yeah, but it's a very PCI response, but so I think at some level, if you have a scoring system but don't really know how to interpret the scores, that's a big deal. And I think I see this also with CBSS and other mechanisms where, it's one thing to kind of talk about the bad things that can happen. It's quite another to kind of identify what that means to an organization and the impact it can have to the business. So let me give an example with CVSS for a moment, because I think that I saw that in Discord. So with CVSS, it tells you, okay, here's this vulnerability, and here's what we think it can do. And then what you got to be able to do is map that vulnerability to what it means for your organization. If that vulnerability happens to be on a server that's got critical data on it, that's got, needs high operational uptime and so on, if that vulnerability is one that can be easily exploited, et cetera, then yeah, we would care about that CVSS score, or that CVE rather, for that particular situation. So it really comes down in that case to understanding the business impact of that CVE and the likelihood of that CVE being exploited. So it's really a risk-driven view of vulnerabilities, which CVSS doesn't capture, right? Because CVSS is very much isolated to a single one-size-fits-all score. But in many ways, organizations kind of need their own CVSS score for what matters to them the most. I think the same thing could be said for this idea of ratings. Like if you have a rating system and it's usually multidimensional with different ratings for different areas, you got to be able to map that to what matters for an organization. So I think that's where I see the problem with the rating system approach. The problem with the PCI type approach is that if you want to kind of get to this binary thing where you either meet it or don't meet it, what ends up happening inevitably is you go to the lowest common denominator, because otherwise it becomes impossible to meet. And so you end up setting the standard where it's not difficult to meet the standard per se, but meeting the standard does not give a guarantee that you've gotten anything right in the long term from a security perspective. And in some cases you can be, as you all know, horrendously insecure and still meet the standard, or you can be perfectly secure, whatever that means, without meeting the standard at all. And so I think in some cases that can be problematic on its own. And so again, I don't know that there's a right answer here. I think maybe there's some combination of both, maybe certain things that you will almost definitely have to have some key checkboxes, and then maybe some kind of a scoring system, but a way to interpret that score in a way that matters to a particular organization.
Well, I agree and disagree with your assertion about PCI or a 100% pass-fail type of system. I work for a company that does, we're a QSA company, so we do the assessments, and we absolutely put our companies that are our clients through the paces of, are you doing all the things that PCI requires? Now, sometimes we have to revert to a compensating control. Somebody had a question in Discord whether that was a PCI thing. Yes, absolutely. There's always been built into PCI, or at least since I think version 2, this concept of, if you're not doing exactly what the requirement says, letter of the law, are you doing something that meets the spirit of the requirement? What's the objective? What are you trying to accomplish? So I agree with your statement that you can absolutely follow compliance like PCI and miss the boat being secure. But to me, it's not so much that you're not following it. It's how you or somebody else, your QSA, has interpreted how well you're following it. Because PCI is extremely comprehensive. And if you're doing it, yeah, you would be secure. I will make that claim, and you guys can fight me and yell at me. But if you're really doing PCI and doing it right, you would be secure. Of course, we have to define what that means, but that's another topic maybe for the after party. So, I agree with your statement in general. Well, go ahead, Scott. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, we said before that the two main drivers in the industry right now are ransomware and PCI.
Yep.
So go ahead, Jeff.
So you just wanted to say that so that somebody could see the scorecard, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
You were interjecting. Yeah, pretty much.
So, pretty much.
I agree with the premise that a lot of people approach PCI the wrong way and do the bare minimum, and they do all the things that we hate to try to get their compliance, especially if it's a self-assessment. A lot of times it's not deliberate. It's through lack of understanding. It's through miscommunication, misconception, and so on and so forth. But there's the flip side that you really could follow PCI and be secure. I mean, following PCI to the letter does not automatically conclude or preclude that you're insecure. Because a lot of people love to say, well, you can be compliant and not be secure. Yeah, you can. But I would say you can be secure by whatever measure you're making and not be secure, just as badly as you can be compliant and not be secure. So the flip side is you can be compliant and be secure, or you can be secure by however you're measuring and be secure. it's all a matter of, is the glass.
Wait a minute, you can be secure and be secure?
Wait.
Yeah, I think you can be. I don't think there's many companies that do that. But
I agree, Jeff. By the way, I want to say one thing. Like, I think, generally speaking, I think all these approaches, PCI, other sort of compliance regimes, are generally a good thing for our industry. I think they sort of force people to behave in a way that at least is in line to what the overall objectives are. I think they also align the economic incentives. So if you think about it for a moment, in many of these cases, you have a situation where you've got an organization that's got my data, and they may not have the same incentives to protect my data as I do, right? But they have my data, so I'm kind of relying on them to care about my data the way that I would personally care about it. And when you put in something like PCI, you kind of create a situation where the economics now line up, where now their incentives to protect my data are more aligned with my incentives to protect my own data. And I think that's generally a good thing for our industry. I think obviously with every standard, you've got to look at the nuances, how it's implemented, how it's enforced, et cetera. And that can create, its own set of issues. But I want to just kind of make sure that I said, like, PCI, I think is a good example of where a lot of effort's been made in trying to get that right. I think I said PCI 2 or 3 times. I'm just hoping I can get the score back up to something closer to even.
We're well behind on that. We are well behind,
winning?
Jeff.
Bro, I'm winning.
Jeff has taken that into
I'm trying to get double digits at least.
Many have tried and failed. Don't look at me. Somebody else was talking. No, anyway, since you're staying on me, we're debating now this whole idea of you can be compliant and secure or not secure, or secure and secure or not secure. And I'm like, it's a Boolean exercise. This is relatively simple math. And I think it to tie back to the credit score, if we're using that as a measure of security, you can have an adequate score by however you're measuring it, and you can still get popped. But it also brings up not to run up the score, but from a PCI perspective, one of the original intents of PCI was to, for the card brands who were paying all these replacement costs for compromised cards, to share the love, so to speak, and pass that cost on to the banks that were doing business with the retailers, the merchants, which are what's called acquiring banks, and then on to the retailers themselves that weren't doing anything from a security perspective and getting millions of cards stolen. So the original intent was, let's pass this on to companies. But in the earliest inception, there was this concept of safe harbor, that if you followed the PCI requirements and you reported your compliance and you got breached, you wouldn't suffer all the replacement costs and fines and maybe the replacement costs, but not all the fines, because you were demonstrating that you were PCI compliant. And then, everybody's gone off on nobody that's ever been breached has been PCI compliant at the time of the breach. And you can argue that, but my contention is PCI wasn't intended to make you impenetrable. The definition of secure, which is impervious to attack, the PCI was designed to make you cover sort of the low-hanging fruit and keep up with as best as you can the basics of security to keep your environment secure, and set you up for detecting and minimizing the damage of a breach when it does occur. All of requirement 10 is all about collecting logs and audit trails so that you have a forensic data trail so that you can mount an investigation when the breach happens. So
do you see PCI adopting this methodology and creating its own PCI credit score that companies can rely on?
The credit score for credit cards?
Yeah. I think the concern is, the PCI councils, they're going to do their own thing. They've kind of been doing this a while, and it has had an impact, as we've agreed, on society. And they're going, 16, 17 years strong. Version 4 is about to roll out, anticipated to roll out probably early Q2 next year. And one of the significant changes that I'm not allowed to tell you about is that they're doing away with the concept of compensating control. And they're simply saying, if you've got a way of meeting the requirement that isn't exactly what the requirement states, and it's reasonable, okay, you'll just meet the requirement. You don't have to go through all this rigmarole of separate documentation and worksheets and proving you're doing something else instead of what PCI is asking, which effectively has been there, but they have to explicitly say it's okay to do that. For
Jeff, we need it two more times. The
concept, the concept of maturity rather than a prescriptive control, it seems to be a very popular one. So we have to measure maturity. But the problem is your measurement of maturity of a specific subsection and my measurement of maturity may differ. So we have to determine how to measure that maturity in a way that is consistent, reliable, and valid. And I'll shut up.
Well, that's, no, you're actually touching on what was going to be my other question way back when to Zuli was, okay, so you got all these different companies out there with risk scores. Who determines what's the an adequate or real basis for any of these measuring sticks, any of these scoring criteria, other than the company said, well, we've put our best practices and our best thought into it, and we think we're better than everybody else. Is there a need for a regulated standard or framework on what scoring should be based on? Because otherwise it's exactly what Josh is asking. Nobody's going to agree on what the score is, or nobody's going to agree on what's the significance of a particular score. Thoughts, ideas?
Yeah, I think it may depend on the use case. Like, for example, in the vendor risk management use case, right, what ends up happening in most cases is nobody looks at the aggregate score that these companies come up with. They look at these sort of individual things that were computed as part of coming up with that aggregate score. And then they make an individual determination about how they want to incorporate that information into a vendor risk assessment as part of managing third-party vendor risk. And so in that case, it's incumbent upon the risk organization in my company or maybe the security team who's focused on vendor risk assessments to determine how they want to interpret that data. I don't know that we can easily come up with kind of a holistic framework that's going to apply across all these different approaches. Number one, I think because it's an evolving game right now. There's so many different places you can look, so many different ways to interpret it. Secondly, I think that the vendors in the space themselves are trying to come up with an approach that kind of has some secret sauce to it, right? So if you look at, you have Security Scorecard, you've got Risk Recon, you've got BitSight. Risk Recon, by the way, acquired by I believe, MasterCard. But in either case, what ends up happening is you've got these different companies that are all taking different approaches to some degree, and they're differentiating based on their approaches. So I don't know how easy it is to come up with an overarching framework. If you do, you have to have some flexibility to allow these individual companies to kind of apply some of their own techniques to get to that score that they want to promise is going to help you do something meaningful.
The paradox I see, and I think this is sort of a human nature type of thing, is, many of us in the industry, we love to pile on and disparage any form of checklist or, just, simple to-do list and follow this and you'll be secure, which is what PCI gets berated for very often. And yet, at the end of the day, what you're just describing is people, organizations really do want, just give me a simple list that I can follow and I can feel reasonably good that I'm doing things securely because somebody else has told me. No more, no less. Don't make me think. Am I meeting some standard? And we shop around and we try to find a standard wherever possible that's more palatable to us. There's that, and I think, frankly, the vendors that you're describing, I think more than anything, they're just trying to drive or create demand because the demand isn't necessarily out there because people may want it, but they don't know that they want it, or they may not know what it looks like, or they may not know that it takes that particular form, which is a whole different problem with our industry in terms of, marketing and demand creation versus is there really something out there, a problem that needs to be solved?
I mean, I'm seeing a lot of RSA's customers in particular. I mean, obviously we've been, through RSA Archer in the risk management space, and we see a lot of our customers trying to incorporate some of these third-party companies that can do risk scoring. into their vendor risk management process. That's definitely happening. But I think it depends on the maturity of the company, and they kind of understand the good and the bad with those approaches, and they account for that. So I think you're right. Like, Jeff, if you just take the number at face value, which a lot of people want to do because they want the easy button, that's a very dangerous game to play at this point. If you want to kind of go a bit deeper and dig into the numbers and pick and choose which of the sort of sub signals that they're collecting are relevant, and fold that into maybe a broader vendor risk assessment program, that's how we recommend our customers to approach it. Like, use the questionnaire still, do the assessments, leverage maybe a third-party kind of automated risk scoring capability to get a set of risk scores across different dimensions, then find a way to kind of coalesce that information into a way that gives you the confidence you need to, let's say, move forward with a particular vendor and believe that they're going to be above a certain threshold from a risk perspective. And I think that's something that's almost very personal. Risk is always a very personal thing, right? I mean, people, when they think about risk, it's really about the impact to me personally or to my organization personally. Something bad can happen, but what is the impact to me? And that can vary from company to company. So I think you have to account for both that likelihood and impact as part of making that risk assessment. And that's something that you have to kind of rely on each individual company to do in a certain way. And maybe you can provide certain guidelines. Maybe it's a standard, maybe like PCI or something along those lines that allow people to kind of do the right kinds of things. But it is a very personal decision at the end.
Stop trying to keep up. I saw what you did there.
I'm trying. I know we're visibly playing. I think we're outgunning us by 2-1 at least. The last time I checked, probably worse than that now. But
Scott, say something so we can see what the score looks like.
2-1. You were right on.
All right.
That's why I was trying to say 2 more times.
Just so I get the percentage right.
Yeah.
So are we good? Can we stop now? Because I hit the numbers.
Yeah,
yes,
no, we're
good. And as a matter of fact, we're at time, so let's stop.
Yeah, we are at time. Actually, there is no hacker security news this week, so we could just keep going. But I'm anxious to try out the after party.
Same here.
So that's going to wrap for today. I wish everyone a very happy and restful and thoughtful and reflective Thanksgiving period for those of us that are in the U.S. I know we have some international listeners, so whatever you're doing on Thursday, enjoy it. We're going to be eating turkey alone with our pod. So that's going to wrap us for this week. We'll be back again next Tuesday, and we're going to try out on the Discord server now what we've been wanting to do for a while now. We're going to, most of us, as we're available, move over to the After Party channel, where we're actually going to get a chance to chat with our listening audience. So that'll do it for us today. Thank you. And for those of you that are on the Discord, we'll be over there in just a minute.